Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. So today I'm delighted to welcome special guest, Christian Rasmussen, who is the founder of Amentara. That is spelled Amentara, if you've not heard the word before, a platform exploring Amanita Muscaria through the lens of ethnobotany, consciousness, and sacred commerce. His work focuses on creating offerings that honor ancient plant wisdom while operating with integrity in the modern world. Through education, formulation, and community, Christian invites a more respectful, intentional relationship with Amanita and the broader intelligence of nature. So fascinating. And you can actually find Christian at amentara.com, Amentara.com. So, Christian, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine. I'm really happy to be here.
Fantastic. So when we met in the pre-call, I was asking you about your journey, and something you shared with me was something around this phrase of heeding a call. You know, people get into what they're doing for different reasons and different pathways, and different things occur. And you were telling me you basically felt a calling and decided to heed that calling. So would you like to kick off by sharing about that?
Yeah, I never had an intention to get into doing what I'm doing. However, some of the largest interest in my life leading up to this endeavor has been plant medicine and pharmacology and helping others and in whatever way that manifested in my life. And this just kind of, it fell into my lap, right? Like, it wasn't something that I was looking to do. I was, and we can get into the inception story if you'd like, but, I was asked to start selling Amanita here in the States because nobody was doing it. So it wasn't, something that I struggled for. And then, it's developed into something, much, much, much larger than me. It was much larger than me to begin with, now, and I know that now. But yeah, it's, and largely currently it kind of comes to manifest by me getting out of the way, by Christian getting out of the way, and just allowing this energy to move through and allowing myself to be the most optimal vessel, we'll say, to transcribe that energy and to bring it forth. So it's, I think oftentimes people's calling is generally largely related to the things that they're most interested in, the things that make them tick the most. Like that's what generally, to me, it appears that that's what our souls came here to explore. And in those things, there are really wonderful gifts that we can then give. I think, the calling for anybody is generally going to be like, how can I give back? Like, or how can I make the world something grander, than when I originally came? And so that's, I think for most people, if they look at what really makes them tick and what really interests them, they can find, a path forward to bring that gift to the world. So, it's a really interesting thing how it all kind of lined up. And I'm not sure, how or why it ended up the way that it did, except for the fact that I seem to be really good at what I do and I really enjoy it, and we're doing a lot of good in the world. So, like, I don't need to understand fully. I just kind of gotta, be in alignment and let it play out.
Beautiful. Do you think that, and had you been using Amanita before that? I presume you must have already experienced it before you started bringing it into the US.
Yeah, I was going through benzodiazepine withdrawal in my late 20s. So benzodiazepines are Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, Valium, your typical anti-anxiety medications, and they're notoriously known in various communities. They're known as the worst drug withdrawal in the world, like worse than opiates, worse than heroin. And I know it's a long story, but the quick version is I was a year into this withdrawal and looking at, 5, 6 more years of it. And I was destitute, ready to end it. My life was falling apart. I was basically in extreme panic attack 24/7. There was no way to live. And I was on a hike and I was, contemplating the end, and I found these mushrooms growing. And like I had mentioned before, I'd always been interested in plant medicine. I'd done basically everything up until that point, except for Amanita and then a couple other ones at that point in time. But there was this extreme magnetism and allure to these mushrooms. I like to relate it to, when you meet somebody who's a future partner or a future best friend, like there's this pull towards that individual. It was just like that, but it was, it was the most intense pull that I had ever experienced. And so I picked the mushrooms and I went to the house and I did research, and I found that they hit the same receptor sites in the brain that benzodiazepines damage. And I was, like I said, I was done. I was done. So I decided that I was going to try it. And within a few weeks, I was like 70-80% healed to me, it felt like. And, which was miraculous. Like I could breathe again, essentially. And so there was this really small community growing up, they're starting around this, and I joined it, and somebody in the community ended up asking me to start selling about 6 months later. So yeah, I had a little bit of experience with it. I had a really profound experience in the sense that, it literally saved my life. There were a handful of other people in the community that had that. I had a very similar experience too. But again, like I wasn't intent. I was just joining this community because these mushrooms saved my life. And so like when I found the mushrooms too, there was this, I like to say that they spoke to me. Some people that aren't, and I think your listeners will understand that. Some people don't understand that, but really like what happened was when I found them, there was this information exchange, and essentially I was told like, we have something for you, and in return you're going to do something for us. And I didn't know what that was going to be until 6 months later when I was asked to start selling. I was like, oh, that's what that meant. Okay, let's go, let's get it.
Awesome. And of course, in a way, you had a bit of a blank slate because, as you say, you were ready to check out. So it wasn't like it was saying, right, we want you to give up your really full, happy life and do this.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, it's more than a fair exchange, really, isn't it? You saved my life. Okay, I'll distribute you in the US.
100%. Yeah.
Reasonable. And what about, when you started taking the benzodiazepine originally, that must have been to treat something. Has that something not returned?
So, I grew up with, and I'll keep this as concise as possible, but I grew up with um intense depression and anxiety as a preteen, we'll say. And hitting puberty, it all started coming out in really like grandiose, monumental ways. And so the anxiety was always, the benzos were for anxiety, right? And like I've always been very business minded, and I've always been an entrepreneur. So I had businesses in my early 20s, and that's when the benzos came into play, because I was doing, sales for my own business, and like they helped. They did. They do what they're supposed to do. Yeah, but that, turned into, an addiction, really. And so Amanita, what it's done, and it's not Amanita, it's the work that I've done since, you know, since coming into this new life, we'll say. And there's there's the roots of the issues which stem back to my own childhood wounding, really. Like that's what it comes down to. So although it helps tremendously, and it helped myself, and it helps many, many people look at the roots, the work is on the individual, right? So like I've done a lot of the work. Of course, there's always work to be done. Maybe not always at some point, we'll see. But right now there's always work to be done. And so yeah, it's a never ending journey and process. And so while I can't say, I'm human, I have my issues too, of course. So while I can't say that it's completely cured or alleviated, like I'm in a position that in my early 20s I could never have imagined being in. So yeah, but it's again, it's due to the work that I put into it. And like Amanita for many people helps them see the work that they need to do. It kind of gently nudges people to choose different paths, and look at what is actually causing these issues that people are having. But ultimately, with anything, it's up to the individual to actually like move that energy or look at that, childhood wounding or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So the work is the work is the work. And it sounds like the Amanita helped you turn a corner.
Yeah.
And then come to a place where you were able to then get on with the work that needed to be done. Is that fair?
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, good for you actually listening to the message that you were hearing out hiking, and the fact that they were just there. I've seen. Am I right that these mushrooms are red with white dots? Extraordinarily fairy tale looking things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the fairy tale mushroom. So, it's the Alice in Wonderland mushroom, it's the Mario mushroom, the Smurfs live under these mushrooms, it's the mushroom emoji on your phone. It's one of the most iconic symbols in the world. It's everywhere. And, it's even everywhere in ancient religious depictions and I mean in iconography around the world. Like it's a very, very prevalent and powerful symbol that in stories, it tends to come up when somebody's bridging from the known into the unknown, which is, very, very fascinating in and of itself. But yeah, there's crazy tie-ins to the beginnings of Christianity or to early Hinduism or to, Zoroastrianism or Mithraism, or all these religions around the world. Like it if it didn't have a hand in these religions, it's at least, it was at least recognized for something, powerful and mystical back then.
Beautiful. You mentioned about the receptors that it relates to the same receptors as the benzodiazepine, and I've heard people talk about receptors before, but I don't really understand how that works. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so we all have, neurotransmitters in the brain, and there's various different types of receptors. So you think of like serotonin. So I think most people know what serotonin is, at least to a degree. So you have, things like antidepressants tend to work on the serotonin receptors, or psychedelics tend to work on the serotonin receptors. So when you think of, ayahuasca or LSD or DMT or psilocybin, those are all serotonergic drugs or substances. There's a whole plethora of different receptors in the body, but then you have dopamine. Everybody knows what dopamine is at this point. But the ones that benzodiazepines work on are the GABA receptors, so the GABAergic substances. And you have your GABA system and your glutamate system, which are very intertwined. GABA is your inhibitory system, so it's relaxing, it lowers inhibitions, it increases sociability, things of that nature. Glutamate is your excitatory neurotransmitter system. So, and they work in tandem with each other. So when GABA is high, when you're feeling more relaxed and comfortable, glutamate is generally lower. And when glutamate's high, when you're more excitatory, GABA is generally lower. So they work in tandem. So when you have something that, like benzodiazepines, they flood the brain with GABA, and there's just a tremendous amount of GABA in the system at any point in time, your glutamate is very low naturally. And then over time, those GABA receptors get downregulated, meaning they pump out less GABA normally. So you need more and more of the substance to, get that same relief and feeling. And when you stop these, this is where you get, withdrawals that can kill people, which benzodiazepines and alcohol, both working on the GABA receptors. When you stop these substances, your glutamate goes through the roof and your GABA goes basically down to nothing. And glutamate through the roof is what causes neurotoxicity. It's what can cause seizures. So like it's very, very dangerous. People can't just like stop these, or they can get seizures and die. You have to taper off them, oftentimes, medically supervised. So when I was, coming off benzos, I was in a state of extreme glutamate and very, very low GABA. So it's basically, I was in a panic attack, as I mentioned earlier, like 24/7. Amanita comes into play, and it works on the GABA system, but in a way that doesn't, and I won't get into the pharmacology too much, but it's a muscimol, the compound in Amanita, is a direct allosteric GABA A agonist. And that means instead of like tricking the brain to produce more GABA, what it does is it directly attaches to GABA receptors. So it mimics GABA. So you're not downregulating or upregulating anything. So there's, in that sense, there's no withdrawal, there's no addiction potential. I mean, anything could be psychologically addicting, like just to make that clear. But there's no risk of, getting in that super excitatory state with excess glutamate when you stop it. And then it also works on the glutamate system, and it actually raises glutamate, interestingly enough. However, and we don't really understand the pharmacology behind this, but what it seems to do is it seems to create new pathways and new networks so that the GABA and the glutamate system can return to homeostasis. So what people find when they utilize Amanita in these really small microdoses while they're getting off of benzos is that it's not only while they're utilizing the Amanita that they find this relief. It's when they stop utilizing it, and the GABA and glutamate system seem to be balanced again. So like I utilized it for like 2 to 3 weeks initially, and it felt like I was like, 70-80% healed by the end of those, and then I stopped. And after 2 weeks of not utilizing it, it still felt like I was like 60-70% better. So it like returned my baseline to homeostasis. And like, what a powerful, I mean, there's, I had tried everything that I had read about under the sun, and nothing. I mean, things maybe moved the needle by like a couple percent, but this was like, it blew everything else out of the water. It was really miraculous.
Extraordinary. So it's actually doing two things in a way. It's helping to heal the damage that's been caused by the deregulating effect of the medicine, the benzodiazepine, and it's also helping heal the system itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when people, by the way, I think this little journey into pharmacology is interesting to include a bit of this actually, because it helps to remind us all that this is actually real. It's not just some sort of mystical pink gas that comes in and everyone's fine. It's a real thing, isn't it? A physical thing. So people who find themselves taking something like benzodiazepine, have they got some sort of imbalance or problem going on with their GABA receptors in order for them to need something like that?
I think likely the data would show that that's generally consistent. However, I want to make the point very clear that we have control in a sense over our neurotransmitter output by our thought processes and by how, like, if you have a thought about, I guess it could be anything, but imagine having a thought that all of a sudden gives you a visceral body reaction. Like, that's your thoughts literally changing the biochemistry of your body. So like when one is living in a state of worry, or like, how is this person going to perceive me, or whatever it may be, like, you're consistently telling your body that you're excited and less relaxed. So like you're consistently changing the neurochemistry of your brain. So like one has the ability through, watching the way that they think and react to things. And this is so much easier said than done, right? But it's true. And to alter the neurochemistry. That's why something like meditation is so powerful, because it completely stops the noise, and in that it increases GABA quite a bit, and it lowers the excitatory response. So, and it increases a plethora of other neurotransmitters that are generally good to increase. So yeah, while that's likely the case for most people, like if we took most people and measured their GABA output that had anxiety, it's likely that it's going to be low. It's also just as true that in some sense they likely got themselves there through how they think and perceive things. So that's always the root, and backed, and there's that's the beginning of the root. Then there's the root that goes way deeper than that. That's like, where does that come from your childhood or from whatever, but so that's like, that's what needs to be looked at before anything.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I can tell the way you talk about it that you actually worked with these ideas for a long time, because you've just summarized an incredibly complex set of information and made it very understandable. So thank you so much.
Of course, yeah.
In the notes here, you're talking about ethnobotany, consciousness, and sacred commerce, but you're also talking about creating offerings that include education. So what are you doing in terms of education?
I wish we could do so much more. It's this stuff like this is really important. We have a whole educational series on the website. I'm actually in the process of writing what I'm calling an Amanita Bible, which is like, the full most comprehensive text that will be out there on Amanita. So there's a lot of things. I go around the country and I speak, or um, we're we're gearing up to um, start doing classes and Zoom meetings, like weekly, touch base points essentially. We're just about done with our microdosing course book, I guess, which will be for anybody. But then following that, there will be a coaching course for people that want to help people through, utilizing Amanita. And really, I say through utilizing Amanita, but it's really, that's not what it is. It's Amanita becomes just a tool in this process of shadow work and self-healing. Like, that's really what it is. So that the intention is, like, it's back to the idea, like, you got to do the work, like Amanita is just here to help throughout that process. So kind of guidelines and instructions, and platforms for people to help other people through doing that work that have already done the work themselves. So there's a whole array of things that we utilize, and there's so much more that I'd like to do. If there was more time in the day, I'd have a lot more done, but yeah, so there's many things that we do for education. That's like really the biggest, most important aspect of all this. I mean, obviously it's important to have the medicine available for people, but without education, nobody's going to know what to do with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Or know what to do around it. Like you were saying, you've got to do the work. Not just take the Amanita and then just sit there and wait for something to happen.
Yeah. And now also, like, it is for people that get into it and don't understand the idea of doing the work. Like, it does have really profound effects on physiology and on the way that we think and perceive things. So even like somebody that doesn't understand this, like, they might, let's just say that they have this hypothetical person A has an anger issue, and they get like triggered at the drop of a dime. Well, so if and they have no idea about looking at the root of this or like doing the work, but when utilizing Amanita, they might find that, in a situation that generally makes them angry, they're more relaxed, and there's more space in between those reactions, and there's this almost gentle nudging away from that reaction, and gentle nudging towards like a more coherent, cohesive, loving individual. So they might have a situation that would make them angry, but they are guided towards not reacting like that. And in that guidance and not reacting like that, there seems to be this potent neuroplastic aspect with Amanita, meaning their brain rewiring aspect. So they don't make that decision, and then all of a sudden, the path is made through that tall grass that normally would have been weedy and tricky to get through, but now they're able to navigate that path easier the next time. So each time that they make a different decision, they're reinforcing these new neuronal networks and new pathways to make that decision easier the next time. So, but that still doesn't address the root of the issue, right? But it helps one move a little bit more freely in these more coherent states. So it seems that there's still a good amount of benefit, but really, like, if one wants to become, the best version of themselves for themselves and for their family and their work or whatever, like, the work needs to be done more than just that. So yeah, just to be clear, it seems like there is still a good amount of benefit, but yeah, like, we need to do the work to become, who we're really intended to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, sometimes we have to go through like a healing phase before we're ready to really get on with the work. Don't we?
Yeah.
And I've had times in my life when I've been trying to heal and do the work and get something to happen, trying to do too much at once. Sometimes it's been time to dial back and go, no,
Yep.
now you're healing. Shut up.
Yep. Yeah, well, that goes back to that original question too, and like heeding the call. Like, sometimes the call, like, I go through this myself, where like there's certain things that I need to address or look at, but I also have to run a business, I have family life, there's a lot going on, And it's hard sometimes to know which to focus on the most. But ultimately what I've continuously come back to is, if I'm not in alignment, everything else starts falling apart. So like that's number one priority constantly. Like, make sure that I'm in alignment. And that is heeding the call, because the more in alignment I am, the more the energy moves through me, and the more I'm able to execute whatever this is wants me to execute, you know. So that's, yeah, it's always got to be top priority, you know, ensuring that that one is the most optimized version of themselves.
Yeah. This idea of being in alignment, I mean, I think I know what you mean, but not everyone knows what that means, or everyone has explored that for themselves. And I think some people are more or less sensitive to whether or not they are in alignment, or the degree to which they are in alignment. Could you expand on that a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to verbalize it is, you know, when I think everybody's had these moments where they're just kind of, they're on their game, you know, they're running on all cylinders. They're, you know, things are falling into place naturally, where, you know, I think for me, it's almost like a flow state gets achieved in their day to day. And if I think pretty much everybody can relate to that, at least at some points in their lives, but there's this space in which one can operate on that level most of the time, if not all the time. And like, that's the place that we're all trying to get to. And it's pretty miraculous, like what can come to fruition, and what tends to like conspire in your favor when, you know, one is in alignment. And when you think of, you know, it's if everything, you know, physics tells us that everything's energy, and like, so when you think of it in those terms, it makes a lot of sense when you're like attracts like, when you're vibrating at a specific level, you're attracting very specific things. And it's like, it can blow my mind when I'm running on all cylinders, like the things that just naturally align for me, like how the universe tends to conspire in my favor. Like, it's really, really profound. And once one tastes that and really sees it, like, it's hard to not, you know, get addicted in some sense to that sensation and like that effect. However, we're all human, and I go through my ups and downs just as anybody else does. So, you know, I hope that at some point I can stay in that state, you know, most of the time, if not indefinitely. But yeah, I'm still working through my stuff just as everybody is. So
Me too.
yeah. Yeah.
But at least, you know, I think that one can get to a point of being okay with the fact that we're still working through our stuff. You know, I remember when I was much younger thinking, well, no, the goal is to get to a place where I've done that.
Yep.
And then I realized that was never going to happen. And then I was upset about that. And then I had to get over that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I I was at a really, really wonderful place in the middle of 2024, and it was a good long stretch that I was there. And I knew better, but I was also like, oh, totally different life. Like, and you know, of course, and it was, you know, absolutely. But of course, you know, as 2024 closed out, moving into 2025, you know, a bunch of old stuff from my childhood started getting brought up again. I'm like, dang, like, you know, I really thought I was at a new space, and I was at a new space, but you know, there's always deeper layers to it. And as that stuff came up, like, I was not in alignment, and things, you know, barriers started coming up, and like the universe stopped conspiring in my favor. It felt like, obviously that's not how it works, because, you know, it was conspiring in my favor to help me address these things that I still hadn't really looked at, or at least deeper layers of them. So it's always conspiring in our favor. It just, sometimes it doesn't feel as good as other times. But yeah, it's a constant thing. And hopefully someday, maybe someday, you know, it won't be, but it sure is still at this point.
Yeah, no, great. Love that. Great reminder for all of us. I can imagine listeners all around the world heaving a sigh of relief. It's not just me then, you know.
Yeah, always everybody.
And at the same time, you're doing this amazing work. So I think that's a great thing to remember as well, isn't it? That the fact that we are constantly going through these ups and downs and everything doesn't mean that we can't, at the same time, be following our calling and doing something that's a gift.
Of course. Yeah.
Because that can be the illusion. So this expression, sacred commerce, that I love the sound of, and I will actually just say one other thing, which is on your website. I just love the whole colorful, spiritual sort of vibe on your website. It's so attractive and fascinating. So I'm just mentioning that because listeners do go and check it out, amentara.com, because there's a lot of fantastic information in there, but also it's a feast for the senses as well, which I think has its place in this whole game of life. Why not actually have a feast for the senses? Because that's an aspect of what life really is. So coming back to what I was going to ask you about, sacred commerce, what is that?
You know, there's a quote that I really love by Matthias de Stefano. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's wonderful. But the quote is, "Money isn't evil. People are stupid." I love it. I love it. But I think that that's relevant in business. And like, unfortunately, I think the majority of people see, business, or especially corporate business, as, as greedy and not in the best interests of the world. And so really at its most fundamental level, the concept of sacred commerce, which I think is a phrase that we coined. I'm not 100% sure. It might be out there before, but I don't think I'd heard of it before I started utilizing it. But it's this concept of business for the greater good, and it's a tricky thing to navigate because we have to make a profit, right? If we don't make profit, like, we're not able to continue doing what we do. But then there's also the concept of like, well, the more profit that we make, the better, the more good we can do. So there's this like weird balancing game that we have to play constantly. And like, even myself, like, again, I am human. At times I'm like focused on the numbers, and like, there's nothing wrong with being focused on the numbers, but at times I can be focused on the numbers more than I'm focused on the benefit and the impact. Not in a sense that it compromises me, but in the sense that I can lose sight temporarily of like why we're doing this. Not fully, but lose that full. And that goes back to this concept of like being in alignment, as much and as often as I can. But so really at its most fundamental level, it's doing business for the betterment of humanity and not for profit. And it manifests itself in so many ways. Like this Amanita industry, we'll say, is really, really interesting in the sense that most of the individuals involved with it aren't in competition with one another. Like, most everybody's in cooperation. Like, I was the first to start doing it in the States, and so we're the largest. Like, but we also work with basically everybody else that's doing this. Like, so we're all working together in cohesion to try, because we're all on the same mission together. And like, that's the cool thing about this industry is like basically everybody that's in it, that's actually doing it properly, is like they see themselves on a mission that's much grander than themselves. And pretty much everybody, from my understanding, has also gotten this calling. They've like heeded the calling to work in this realm and to help bring this like most ancient magical medicine out to the world. So there's this like beautiful aspect of cooperation, which I think is, really, really fascinating. So I think an interesting aspect to this is I come from the Weyerhaeuser family, and Weyerhaeuser was, so you have in the States, you had like Rockefeller, who did oil, you have Vanderbilt, who did steel, and then you had Weyerhaeuser, who did lumber and timber. And so that was my great 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 grandfather. Weyerhaeuser isn't discussed at all, even though he was the second wealthiest man next to Rockefeller, because he was not a cutthroat businessman. He worked in cooperation with everybody. So instead of buying out his competitors, he partnered with them. He partnered with everybody in the lumber industry. And it was this beautiful way of doing business, like back then, on a really, really large scale, that was cooperative instead of competitive. And so he's like, and there's other reasons that I won't get into that I believe he's not discussed about, because like nobody knows who he is. But it's the lineage that I come from, and it's the values that were instilled in me since I was a child through the family that I come from. So yeah, there's this like inherent innate aspect of cooperation to it. But and then there's a lot of other ways that it manifests itself. But really, at the most fundamental level, it's we're in this to have the largest possible positive impact on the world that we can have. And with that being the goal, and that being the thing that we think about the most at the forefront of everything, how does everything else line up? You know, how do we navigate profits and outreach and education and blah, 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 to ensure that that goal is the one that we're focusing on the most?
Amazing. That's fantastic. I have not heard of the Weyerhaeuser family, and I have heard of the other two. And I suspect you're right. I suspect that is one of the reasons. That this guy sounds like he just got on with business in friendship and cooperation with other people.
There's a really wonderful quote. There was a newspaper article written about him entitled "Richer Than Rockefeller?" question mark or something like that. And because they couldn't trace money back then. They didn't really know like how wealthy these people were. And the whole article was about like this man who's anonymous, who nobody knows about. Like he also liked to be anonymous. Like he didn't want to be known. He wasn't making big brazen public moves. But so the article is like, richer than Rockefeller. And there's a quote of him, I believe it's talking to his sons, and they're talking about the article. And he says, I don't think I'm the richest man in the world, but I think I might be the happiest. And like, boom, what a powerful quote, and that's like a testament to the type of individual that he was. Like, yeah, just a magical, magical individual.
Fantastic. That is so inspiring, because the reality is, in our current world, we need businesses, we need corporations, we need all these things. Just the shoes I'm wearing, all these things that we use every day. We can't just suddenly not have them all. Well, we could, but there would be a lot of complaining and weeping.
Yeah, well, and it drives innovation too, right? Like we wouldn't be anywhere where we're at, as far as technology and advancements, and even things like public health advancements. Like we wouldn't be anywhere near where we're at without, business. So it's an integral part of where we're at and where we're going as a species. And it's with little shifts. Maybe that's a big shift for certain people, but with that shift towards, how does this business like bring the most good to the world? Like it could really revolutionize the way that the entire world operates.
Yeah. Wow. So something I do like to ask guests at this point is, if we think about, there's a lot of people in the world who are also doing their best to be helpful in some sort of leadership capacity, in whatever form that may be. Political leaders, corporate leaders, spiritual leaders, community leaders, parents, all of these people. Some of these people like to tune into this show, and we've got people listening to the show all over the world. Is there something you'd like to say to those people in particular, in addition to what you've already said, which has been brilliant, that might be helpful for them as they are navigating their path of heeding their calling, being in alignment, contributing?
Yeah, I think first off, to anybody and I think we're all leaders in some sense. I love that you mentioned parents, because like that's, yeah, of course, like parents are absolutely leaders. And like we're all in some sort of sense in charge of educating somebody in some way, however that may look. So I think first, like, I want to just say like how important and how appreciative I am and the divine is of the work that anybody's doing, or the work that you're doing. And I think that oftentimes, and me personally, I lose sight of appreciating myself and what I've been accomplishing and what I've been doing. I think like the most basic yet powerful statement that I could say is like, don't lose sight of that appreciation that, you know, the divine or God or your higher self or your children or, you know, the people in your business or whatever it may be, the appreciation that they hold for you at the more deep fundamental levels, even if that appreciation is not shown or seen all the time. Like, I think that appreciation kind of rests largely inside your heart space. So tap into that more often and be appreciative and grateful for what the good that you've put in the world, and don't feel bad about the missteps that you have, because we all have them. I had a bunch a couple weeks ago. It was not fun, but you know, it's okay. Like, we have them. And yeah, just give yourself more credit, because this life ain't easy. It's not easy. And you're doing the best you can, and we can always do better. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's the easiest, most concise way that I could say that with an impact, I feel.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm personally going to take that one because that is a big message, you know, and I think it's so easy, particularly when we really want to contribute. It's so easy to constantly judge ourselves for not having done enough or not having done well enough or for long enough or for enough people, etc., etc. So beautiful. Thank you. So we've actually talked about quite a lot today. It's been fascinating. Has there been for you a favorite part of our conversation today?
I love, you know, the tone and the depth of this conversation is different than a lot of the podcasts that I do. Honestly, most of them are it's very like, I don't want to say surface level, because I tend to always go pretty deep. I can't help myself. It's just how I am. But you know, just the cadence and the the level of the questioning tends to be more basic, we'll say, where this like really got into the depths of like who I am. And because like this is the stuff, this is the type of conversation that makes me tick. Like when it comes down to, you know, earlier we were talking about like that being in alignment and you know what makes you tick and what interests you. Like when it comes down to it, it's not the plant medicine, it's not any of that stuff. It's these deep conversations and these deep emotions and these places of depth. Because like for me, the deeper you go, the closer to the creator or the divine you are. And so like I want to go deep. So I appreciate that you're able to bring it to that level and then hear me and meet me in that space. Like that's really, really important for me. And so, you know, it's morning time here. And I was very tired waking up. I had a slow morning, but now I feel, you know, in this alignment that I didn't have coming into the conversation. So, you know, I sincerely appreciate you and you know, and your ability to meet me in those deeper spaces. So yeah, I've enjoyed all of it. I really love this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I very much appreciate that. And me as well. Thank you so much because like you say, these conversations are so great. It's such a beautiful thing. And for me, it's the end of the workday. So it's a beautiful way to complete the workday. So
Yeah. Awesome.
thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you, Captain.
And thank you, everybody watching and listening, wherever in the world you are. There are some countries where there's, I don't know, 3 people listening. Other countries where there's thousands of them. So whichever one you are, do check out Christian's website, amentara.com, which is AMENTARA.com, even if only to look at the beautiful pictures. And if you know, do feel called to check out this beautiful medicine, then do. And from listening to Christian, you can tell this is not just for jollies and giggles. This is real. This is for really supporting you. And if you're out there doing the work, blessings upon you. And if you're working on healing to get to the point where you can start doing the work, blessings upon you as well. Check out my other episodes at truthandtranscendence.com. And if you enjoyed the energy of this conversation and you think you might like to look into possibly working with me directly, go to beingspace.world where you can find out what I'm up to. So thanks again, Christian. Have a fantastic day.
You too. Thank you, Catherine.